All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. And as folks join, they can jump right in and pick up with where we're at. So, hi, everyone. My name is Christy Scheffler, and I am part of the team of the National ECE Workforce Center. And here today with two of our senior TA specialists, Sandra Random and Shannon Smith. And we are following April's webinar using the systems change framework to create intentional change with and for the ECE workforce. And we're excited to join you today in a new way, a little bit different, talking together with you about systems change. I do want to note on the next slide that our center is supported by a grant from the Administration for Children and Families. But while ACF is the source of our center's funding, we don't necessarily reflect the views or opinions of ACF, including the Office of Early Childhood Development, the Office of Head Start, and the Office of Child Care. So welcome. As we get started with our coffee chat today, a first question is, what is a coffee chat? So the Workforce Center is launching coffee chats as an informal way for systems leaders, for program leaders to come together with peers, with staff from the Workforce Center to think about and to talk about products that are coming out from the center and how they really relate to the context that you're living. So coffee chats are designed to be opportunities for participants to actively engage in discussion and planning around different topics that are all related to strengthening systems that are supporting the ECE workforce. The coffee chats will be a series of monthly conversations, each one focusing on a specific product that's being released from the Workforce Center, just like today's session is focused on April's Systems Change Framework webinar. The authors of each of the products are going to be joining us for these discussions, so we have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to speak with them directly. What does this look like? Each coffee chat is going to begin with a brief recap of the topic, reviewing the information from the product that we're talking about. And then we'll spend the majority of our time together in smaller breakout rooms where we can really share with and hear from colleagues about what this topic does look like in your context, as well as what it could look like, including identifying some actionable steps that we can each take to move in that direction. Next slide. A few notes as we get started. First, if it would be helpful to you, you can turn on closed captions by clicking More on your Zoom taskbar and selecting the language that you would like for captions. So coffee chats are set up as a conversation, as a meeting rather than a webinar. So if you are comfortable and your technology allows, we do appreciate cameras being turned on. We do ask to please keep your microphone muted during this initial recap and review portion. And then once we shift to the breakout rooms for conversation, we'd love to hear from you directly. And you are welcome to submit questions in the chat. We may be able to answer these questions during today's session, and we'll also be collecting and answering questions to share them out following the session. All right, so April's Systems Change Framework webinar was led by this team of colleagues at the National ECE Workforce Center. Dr. Ann Douglas, our research co-director and also a professor and the founder of the Early Education Leaders Institute at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Dr. Rena Hallam, our research co-director, who is also a professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences and the interim dean for the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Delaware. Brandy Jones-Lawrence, our Director of Technical Assistance, and Dr. Eugen Lee, the co-lead of our Systems Change Framework Impact Team and the Director of Research at the Early Education Leaders Institute at UMass Boston. So today, Drs. Douglas, Hallam, and Lee are going to be joining us for this coffee chat. So to get us started, team, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through a recap of the webinar to set us up for our conversation.
Thanks, Christy. Go to the next slide. So this is the Early Care and Education Workforce Systems Change Framework. We'll just do a review, walking through each part of it, defining the terms that you see here, and talking a little bit about each part of the framework. So I'll start with a quick orientation to how we structured this framework. The framework is structured kind of like a logic model or a theory of change, or especially what some people call a driver diagram. So it's a visual representation to show how a goal or an aim could be achieved. So the aims on the left are what we're trying to achieve. They're the ultimate desired outcome. This is our destination. The primary drivers are the things that need to change or be in place to achieve those aims, and they reflect different parts of systems. And then the secondary drivers on the right are the strategies, how to strengthen those primary drivers to achieve the aim. Next. So let me start with the framework's 3 aims. The first aim is competitive and fair compensation. This means that early educators' compensation is comparable to K-12 educators, for example, with similar roles, qualifications, and experience. And it also means that early educators are paid at least a living wage. The second aim is clear and accessible career pathways. This aim is about making sure that educators clearly can see what they need, like qualifications or experiences to grow in their careers. It also means that career pathways have multiple entry points, so educators with different education or experience levels can get started and move forward no matter where they are in their journey. The third aim is positive work environments. This means that educators are working in conditions that are physically and emotionally safe, healthy, and supportive. These aims were designed to respond to the needs of early educators. And one thing that I want to note here is that these aims are meant to apply to educators across all settings. So that includes centers, family childcare, preschool, and pre-K. It's also important to remember that all 3 aims are deeply interconnected. So even if a change effort focuses on just one aim, like career pathways or qualifications, it also needs to address others sometimes in order to be truly effective, such as compensation. Now let's move on to the primary drivers. So the primary drivers are the levers for change. They're the things that have to be in place to help you make real progress toward each aim. And in the change framework, there are 9 primary drivers, and they apply across all 3 aims. That's because they're meant to address the core parts of systems. And when we reviewed systems change initiatives and research out there in the world to develop this change framework, we found that these 9 primary drivers are the same. They come up over and over and again about being those core levers for change. So when you look at this, you might be thinking, wait, you just said there were 9 drivers, but I just see 3 circles. That's because we've organized the primary drivers into these 3 types of drivers. And so what we have here is 3 practice drivers, 4 infrastructure drivers, and 2 principal drivers. So there's practice, infrastructure, and principles drivers. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you, Jen, to talk more about these primary drivers.
Thanks, Anne. Let me start with 3 practice drivers. So in this practice driver circle at the top, we have 3 primary drivers. So these drivers are the programmatic and policy actions that you put into place to achieve the 3 aims you just saw. So they are the things that educators and programs experience in their day-to-day work. That's why they are often the most visible and tangible parts of a change effort. Now let's take a look at what those 3 practice drivers are. Okay, so here the first practice driver is policy-specific promising practices. So having these drivers in place means that you are using programs or strategies or tools that are effective as well as tailored to your community's needs. And these promising practices are specific to each aim. So the strategies that work for improving compensation may look different from what you would need to improve working conditions or career pathways. Second practice driver is targeted and aligned policies. This one is about making sure your state or local policies are actually set up to support your goals, especially the promising practices you are just trying to put in place. So for example, if your goal is to increase wages, this targeted and aligned policy driver is about removing policy barriers and making sure things like funding formulas or licensing requirements are actually working in favor of your goals, not getting in the way. The third practice driver is data-driven decision-making. Anytime you're implementing a strategy or program, this driver means that you are using data throughout the process to understand what's working, what's not, and what might need to shift to make change efforts successful. Okay, so the second type of driver is infrastructure drivers. These drivers are meant to address the structural parts of a system, the things that support and connect and hold everything together. Even if you have great programs or strategies ready to go, those practice drivers, they can end up being less effective if the infrastructure isn't there to support them. So here are 4 drivers in these categories. First one, we have leadership and governance. This driver is about having strong leadership and coordinated governance structures in place to guide the work. Second driver is multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration. So workforce issues don't sit in just one part of the system, and no single agency or sector can solve them alone. That's why this driver is about, what this driver is about. It's about bringing together the right partners, each with their own expertise, to tackle different parts of a system in a coordinated way. Third driver is data infrastructure. This one is about having the data system in place to make it possible to actually use the data. Earlier, we talked about data-informed decision-making as a practice driver. The difference between these two is that data-informed decision-making is what you do with the data. This data infrastructure driver is what makes that possible in the first place. Without the right infrastructure behind it, using data can be really limited, and you might not have access to the information you need, or it might not be available when you really need it. The last infrastructure driver is sustainability. This driver is about having reliable funding and supportive policies in place. So when this driver is strong, change efforts can keep going even when leadership changes or priorities shift. This driver is what helps actions and initiatives stick around long enough to make a lasting impact. So now I'll turn it over to Rina to talk about the principal drivers.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk with you about this last set of drivers, the principal drivers, give an example of kind of how all of these fit together. And then I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you all about how these drivers might relate or support you in your context. So principal drivers often influence how all the other drivers are put into place. So they're the underlying beliefs and mindset. So sometimes you can't see them, but they can be really powerful because those values shape how we make decisions. We have 2 principal drivers that we want to talk to you about today. That come from the change framework. And the first is engaging educators in systems change. So, and what we mean by that is really authentically developing meaningful partnerships with early educators in ways that not only kind of give feedback at the end of an initiative or a project, but really help us co-design and think through some of these initiatives. So really elevating and amplifying the voice of early educators as we work towards these aims. And then the second driver is culture and narrative shift, which is the driver is often not easy to use, but it can be very, very powerful. It can really lead to changes in public perception. So it's really like how we think about the work, how we think about early care and education and what the workforce and the types of working conditions that they deserve. So having this change and having this driver in place or thinking about how to move this driver can be really important to systems change. So how do they work together? So we've walked through, you've heard Anne give an overview, Jen talk about the first two, policy specific and infrastructure. And then we talked about how the beliefs and practices relate. And now we're thinking about how all three of those pulling drivers from each of those three categories can work together. And what we see here are policy-specific promising practices, engaging educators in systems change, and data infrastructure. So I'm going to give an example. So let's say that you're in a state and you're working towards improving compensation, and I'm assuming that many of you here might be actually thinking about that. And the strategy that you use is to create a salary scale. So a salary scale is one of the practice drivers under that aim. So it would fall under this first circle here, policy-specific promising practices. And in terms of engaging educators in systems change, bringing educators into the process to co-design the scale. So again, early in development, this reflects that principal driver of engaging educators. And then this third area of infrastructure, data infrastructure, if you design or revise or implement a data system to track implementation outcomes, that's one of the infrastructure drivers that helps get that initiative in place. So this is just to give an example of how, as you're thinking about moving towards an aim, pulling drivers from each of those three categories and how they're interdependent in ensuring that we're successful in meeting our aims. So, because in addressing workforce issues, as we all know, many of us have been working on these issues for a long time. We really do need to think about this in a systems way and across these three drivers area, and not just one, not just the practice, for example, thinking about these other pieces as well.